The sound of metal scraping against rock had become Katherine Calloway's only companion in the blistering heat of that July afternoon in 1883, and she was beginning to wonder if this broken shovel would be the death of her before thirst ever got the chance. The handle had cracked clean through 2 days ago, leaving her with barely enough wood to grip while she dug into the unforgiving California desert floor. Her hands were blistered and bleeding, wrapped in strips torn from her only good petticoat, but she kept digging because the alternative was watching her small homestead turn to dust and her dreams blow away with the desert wind. Katherine had arrived in Randsburg, California, 6 months earlier with her father's land deed clutched in one hand and his journal in the other. He had died of fever in San Francisco before they could make the journey together, leaving her alone at 22 with nothing but the promise of 40 acres and the stubborn determination that ran in the Calloway bloodline. The townspeople had looked at her with a mixture of pity and skepticism when she announced her intention to work the land herself. A woman alone in the Mojave Desert, trying to cultivate something from nothing, seemed like a fool's errand. But Katherine had spent the last 6 months proving she was no fool, even if she was currently losing a battle with a dried-up well and a broken shovel. The well had been her father's greatest concern in his journal. Water was life out here, more precious than gold, and the old well on the property had collapsed in on itself years ago. She had been digging for 3 weeks now, going down 15 feet into hard, packed earth and stone, and still no sign of water. Her water barrels were nearly empty, the ones she filled in town every week and hauled back in her weathered wagon. If she did not strike water soon, she would have to abandon the land, return to San Francisco, and find work as a seamstress or a cook or whatever else a woman alone could manage. The thought made her dig harder, even as her muscles screamed in protest. The sun was beginning its descent toward the distant mountains when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Katherine straightened, using the broken shovel as support, and shaded her eyes against the glare. 4 riders were coming up the dusty road that led to her property, their silhouettes wavering in the heat shimmer. Her heart began to pound. Visitors were rare out here, and a woman alone had reason to be cautious. She climbed out of the well hole, her legs trembling from exhaustion, and reached for the rifle she kept propped against the water barrel. As the riders drew closer, she could make out more details. The man in front sat tall in his saddle, wearing a dark hat pulled low against the sun. 3 other men rode behind him, and behind them, a pack mule loaded with equipment. They were not riding hard, not approaching with any obvious threat, but Katherine kept her hand near the rifle all the same. The lead rider raised his hand in a peaceful gesture as they came within shouting distance. "Afternoon, miss," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the stillness. "We do not mean any trouble." Katherine did not move. "State your business." The riders came to a stop about 20 feet away, close enough for conversation but far enough to show they respected her space. The lead rider dismounted, moving slowly and deliberately, keeping his hands visible. He was a tall man, lean and weathered by sun and wind, probably in his late 20s. His face was shadowed by his hat, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Name is Henry Lockwood," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and striking blue eyes that seemed startlingly bright against his tanned skin. "These are my men. We have been working on the Morrison place about 8 miles south. We heard there was someone trying to make a go of the old Calloway property, and I wanted to come see if you might need any help." Katherine's grip on her rifle relaxed slightly, though she did not let go entirely. "What makes you think I need help?" Henry's eyes moved to the well hole, the piles of rocky earth, and the broken shovel lying on the ground. A slight smile touched his lips, but it was not mocking. "No offense intended, miss, but that shovel looks like it has seen better days, and digging a well is hard work even with proper tools and experienced hands." One of the men behind him, a stocky fellow with a graying beard, spoke up. "We have got picks, proper shovels, and a pulley system on that mule. If you are hitting water soon, you will need casing too, or the whole thing will collapse." Katherine felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the temperature. Pride warred with practicality in her chest. She had been determined to do this alone, to prove she could manage without help, without charity, without anyone thinking she was weak or incapable. But her hands were bleeding, her back was screaming, and the broken shovel was not going to cut through another foot of hard earth, let alone the additional depth she probably needed. "I cannot pay you," she said finally, lifting her chin. "Not in money, anyway. I have some preserves and I could cook meals." Henry shook his head, taking a step closer. "We are not asking for payment. The Morrison family has been good to us, and Mrs. Morrison specifically mentioned you might need assistance. She said you have been too stubborn to ask for help in town." Despite herself, Katherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. She had met Abigail Morrison once in the general store, and the older woman had indeed suggested several times that Katherine should not be afraid to ask for help. Apparently, Mrs. Morrison had decided to send help whether Katherine asked for it or not. "I have been managing," Katherine said, but even to her own ears, it sounded weak. Henry's expression grew more serious as he looked at her wrapped hands and the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Miss Calloway, there is no shame in accepting help. This land is hard, and making it alone is near impossible. Let us help you get this well dug proper. Once you have water, you will have a real chance at making this place work." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected condescension, the kind of patronizing tone she had heard from so many men in town who thought a woman had no business trying to homestead alone. But Henry spoke to her as though he respected her effort, as though helping her was simply the right thing to do rather than rescuing a helpless female. Katherine took a deep breath and lowered the rifle completely. "All right, I appreciate the help." The tension in the air eased immediately. The three other men dismounted, and Henry made quick introductions. The older man with the graying beard was Thomas Webb, who had been working wells for 30 years. The younger two were brothers, Miguel and Javier Reyes, who had come up from Mexico looking for work and ended up joining Henry's crew. They were all respectful, tipping their hats to her and speaking with easy courtesy that put her somewhat at ease. Within minutes, they had unloaded the pack mule and were examining the well hole. Thomas climbed down into it with a lantern, checking the depth and the composition of the earth. When he emerged, his expression was thoughtful. "You have got about another 10 feet to go, I would reckon," he said, wiping his brow. "The earth is getting darker down there, which means moisture. You have been digging in the right spot." Relief flooded through Katherine. 10 more feet. She could have done it eventually, but with the broken shovel, it might have taken her another month, and she did not have that kind of time. "We will get started first thing tomorrow morning," Henry said. "It is too late to begin now, and this kind of work is best done in early morning before the heat gets unbearable." Katherine nodded, then realized the social obligation. "I have a small cabin. It is not much, but I can offer you water and a place to wash up, and I can make supper." "That would be much appreciated," Henry said. "We have been camping rough the last few nights. A home-cooked meal would be welcome." She led them to the cabin, a small structure her father had apparently built years ago during one of his visits to the property. It was rough but solid, one main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom sectioned off with a curtain, and a lean-to out back that served as a kitchen when the weather was hot. It was humble, but she had cleaned it thoroughly and made it as comfortable as possible with the few belongings she had brought from San Francisco. The men set up their bedrolls outside under the stars, insisting they were used to sleeping rough and did not want to impose. Katherine brought out a barrel of water for washing, and while they cleaned up, she started preparing supper. She had flour, some bacon she had been rationing carefully, beans, and a few vegetables from the struggling garden she had been watering sparingly. It was not fancy, but she put together a respectable meal of bacon, beans, and biscuits, with the last of her coffee to wash it down. They ate as the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. The men were good company, telling stories about their work on various properties, the challenges of desert farming, and the quirks of different landowners they had worked for. Katherine found herself relaxing, laughing at Thomas's tale about a well that had struck an underground stream and turned into a geyser, flooding half an acre before they could cap it. Henry sat across from her, and she found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly throughout the evening. There was something steady about him, a quiet competence that reminded her of her father. He did not dominate the conversation, but when he spoke, the others listened. He asked her about San Francisco, about her journey to Randsburg, and he listened to her answers with genuine interest. "Your father must have had faith in this land to leave it to you," Henry said as the stars began to emerge overhead. Katherine looked down at her plate. "He never got to see it. He died before we could make the journey together, but his journal was full of plans for this place. He believed the soil was good, that with proper irrigation it could support crops. He just never had the chance to prove it." "You are proving it for him," Henry said quietly. "That takes courage." She met his eyes across the firelight, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. He saw her not as a foolish woman playing at homesteading, but as someone carrying on a legacy, honoring a promise. The recognition in his gaze made something in her chest tighten. The evening ended with the men retiring to their bedrolls and Katherine retreating to her cabin. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the desert night, and felt the ache in her muscles with something approaching satisfaction. Tomorrow the work would continue, but she would not be alone. The thought brought both relief and an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation that she chose not to examine too closely. Dawn came with a blaze of gold across the eastern sky. Katherine woke to the sound of the men already stirring, and she quickly dressed and built up the fire to make coffee and breakfast. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, they had eaten and were ready to work. Thomas took charge of the operation with the efficiency of long experience. He and Miguel would take the first shift in the well, using the proper picks and shovels they had brought. Javier would manage the pulley system to haul up buckets of dirt and rock. Henry would help coordinate and take shifts as needed. Katherine insisted on helping, and after a brief debate, Henry handed her a rake to help spread the excavated earth away from the well site. It was lighter work than she had been doing, and she was grateful for it, though she tried not to show how much her body was aching from the previous weeks of labor. The work was hard and steady. Thomas and Miguel dug in 2-hour shifts, coming up sweating and covered in dust. Henry went down next, and Katherine found herself watching the well opening with more anxiety than she expected. There was something about knowing he was down there in that narrow hole that made her nervous in a way she had not felt when she was doing the digging herself. When Henry emerged after his shift, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his face was streaked with dirt, but he was grinning. "We are definitely getting close. The earth is damp now." Katherine felt a surge of excitement. "Really? Come look." She peered over the edge of the well, and Thomas held the lantern low so she could see. The bottom of the hole, now at least 20 feet down, was indeed darker, and the earth had a different texture. Her heart began to race. Another few feet, Thomas predicted. Maybe less. They worked through the heat of the day, taking breaks for water and rest. Katherine brought out lunch, simple as it was, and they ate in the shade of the cabin. The conversation flowed easily now, comfortable. Miguel told stories about growing up in Sonora, and Javier, who was quieter, revealed he was a skilled carpenter when Henry mentioned that Katherine's cabin could use some repairs. "The roof is solid, but those shutters are hanging crooked," Javier observed. "If you have some spare wood, I could fix them properly." Katherine felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "I have been meaning to get to that. There has just been so much to do." "That is what we are here for," Henry said. "Let us get this well finished, and then we can help with some of the other work around the place before we head back to Morrison's." "You do not have to do that," Katherine protested. "You have your own work. Morrison's place is in good shape for now. We have got a few days." Henry's blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Besides, I would like to see you get a fair start here." There was something in the way he said it, a personal investment that went beyond simple neighborly help. Katherine felt her cheeks warm and looked away, suddenly flustered in a way she had not been since she was a young girl. The afternoon shift brought success. Miguel was in the well when he shouted up, his voice echoing with excitement. "Water! I hit water!" Everyone rushed to the edge. Sure enough, when they hauled up the bucket, it was filled with muddy water. Thomas went down to assess, and when he came up, he was beaming. "It is a good flow," he announced. "Not a gusher, but steady. We need to dig down another couple feet to ensure a good pool, then we need to case it properly." "But you have got your water, Miss Calloway." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. After weeks of back-breaking work, after the frustration and the fear and the doubt, she had water. Her land had water. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Henry stepped close, his voice low and meant only for her. "You did it. You found the right spot, and you had the determination to keep going." She looked up at him, blinking back tears. "I could not have finished it without you, without all of you." "Maybe not as quickly," he conceded. "But you would have found a way. You are not the type to give up." The certainty in his voice steadied her. She took a deep breath and turned to all the men. "Thank you, all of you. This means everything." They worked the rest of the day finishing the well properly. Thomas installed the wooden casing to prevent collapse, and they built up a stone rim around the top. By the time the sun was setting, Katherine had a functioning well with a proper pulley system for hauling up buckets. The water was clean and cold once the initial muddy flow cleared, and it tasted sweeter than anything she had ever drunk. That evening, she used some of her precious supplies to make a better meal, breaking into the small store of ham she had been saving for a special occasion. The men appreciated the effort, and the mood was celebratory. They sat around the fire talking and laughing, and Katherine felt a sense of belonging she had not experienced since her father's death. As the others drifted off to their bedrolls, Henry lingered by the fire. Katherine sat across from him, wrapped in her shawl against the cooling desert night. "You are planning to stay, then?" Henry asked after a moment of comfortable silence. "Of course, this is my home now." "It is a hard life out here, lonely." Katherine smiled slightly. "Loneliness is not always about being alone. I was lonely in San Francisco, surrounded by people who looked at me with pity after my father died. Out here, I feel like I have purpose." Henry nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I understand that. I came out west 5 years ago after my family's farm back in Missouri failed. Everything we had worked for just gone. Out here, a man can build something new. I suppose it is the same for a woman with enough courage. Is that what you are doing? Building something new, trying to? I have been saving money, learning everything I can about ranching and farming in this climate. I want my own place eventually, something I can build with my own hands. He paused, then added quietly, something I can build a future on. There was weight to his words, a significance that hung in the air between them. Katherine felt her heart beating faster. That is a good dream, she said softly. So is yours. A woman making her way on her own land, proving everyone wrong, that is something worth fighting for. Their eyes met across the flames, and Katherine felt something shift between them, something that had been building since that first afternoon when he rode up with his offer of help. It was not just gratitude she felt, though there was plenty of that. It was recognition, attraction, the beginning of something she had not been looking for but could not deny now that it was here. I should let you get some rest, Henry said finally, breaking the moment. Tomorrow we can work on some of those other repairs if you will allow it. Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him walk to his bedroll, then retreated to her cabin with her thoughts in turmoil. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity and growing awareness. The men worked on her property as though it was their own, fixing the crooked shutters, reinforcing the lean-to, clearing brush away from the cabin to reduce fire risk. Javier revealed his carpentry skills by building her a proper table and 2 sturdy chairs from some scrap wood they found in the old barn. Miguel helped her expand and properly irrigate her garden using water from the new well. Thomas showed her how to maintain the well casing and pulley system. And Henry was everywhere, working alongside his men but always seeming to be near Katherine, ready to help lift something heavy or offer advice, or simply share a quiet conversation during water breaks. She found herself watching for him, her heart lifting when she heard his voice or caught sight of him across the yard. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their views on everything from the best way to grow tomatoes in desert heat to whether California would continue to grow as rapidly as it had been. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the men were packing up their tools in preparation to leave the next morning, Henry asked Katherine to walk with him. They strolled away from the cabin as the sun began its descent, the desert cooling around them. "Your place is coming together," Henry said. "With water and these repairs, you have got a real chance of making it, thanks to you and your men. You would have managed. It might have taken longer, but you are stubborn enough." He said it with affection, and Katherine smiled. "My father used to say the same thing." He said stubborn was a family trait, and probably the reason we Calloways had survived as long as we had. They walked in silence for a moment, then Henry stopped and turned to face her. His expression was serious, almost nervous, which was strange to see on a man who seemed so confident in everything else. "Katherine, I need to say something before I leave tomorrow." Her heart began to pound. "All right." "These last few days, getting to know you, seeing how you have been fighting to build something here, it has meant something to me. You mean something to me." He took a breath. "I know it is fast, and I know you are focused on your land right now, but I would like permission to come calling on you. Properly. Not just as a neighbor helping out, but as a man interested in a woman." Katherine felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had felt the attraction between them, the growing connection, but hearing him say the words out loud made it real and immediate and overwhelming. "Henry, I am not asking you to make any decisions right now," he continued quickly. "I just want you to know my intentions. I would like to spend more time with you to see where this might go, if you are willing." She looked up at him, this strong, steady man who had appeared when she needed help most, who had treated her with respect and kindness. who made her heart race and her thoughts scatter. The practical part of her whispered warnings about moving too fast, about focusing on survival before romance. But another part, a part that had been lonely for so long, wanted to reach out and grab this chance at connection. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I would like that." The smile that spread across Henry's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from work, warm and strong, and the touch sent a shiver through her despite the heat. "I will come back next week," he said, "and the week after, and as often as I can manage. I want to know you, Katherine. I want to see if what I am feeling now grows into something more." "What are you feeling now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I have been searching for something I could not name, and I just found it." Katherine's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such raw honesty. She squeezed his hand, unable to find words adequate to express the tumult of emotions in her chest. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand as the stars emerged overhead, and Katherine felt as though her life was beginning again, not just because of the well and the water and the possibility of making her land work, but because of this unexpected connection with a man who saw her as an equal, as someone worth knowing. Henry and his men left the next morning with promises to return. As Katherine watched them ride away, she touched her fingers to her lips, remembering the gentle kiss Henry had placed on her knuckles before mounting his horse. It was a small gesture, old-fashioned and courtly, but it had made her feel cherished in a way she never had before. The days that followed were filled with work, but now it felt different. The well provided steady water and her garden began to thrive. She planted more vegetables, started planning for a larger planting in the fall. She repaired her wagon, made trips to town for supplies, and held her head high when the townspeople asked about the new well. Let them speculate about the men who had helped her. She had done nothing to be ashamed of. Henry came the following Sunday, riding up alone in the afternoon with a bundle tied to his saddle. Katherine's heart had leaped at the sight of him, and she had to force herself not to run out to meet him like an overeager girl. "Afternoon," he said, dismounting with that easy grace she found so attractive. "I brought you something." He untied the bundle and presented her with 3 young chickens in a crate. "Thought you could use some laying hens. Mrs. Morrison had extras and she insisted I bring them over." Katherine laughed with delight. "Chickens! Oh, Henry, this is wonderful." They spent the afternoon building a small coop using scrap wood and chicken wire Henry had also brought. As they worked side by side, Katherine felt the easy companionship that had developed during those well-digging days. They talked and laughed, and Henry told her about the progress on the Morrison place. She shared her plans for expanding her garden and possibly getting a milk cow by next spring. When the coop was finished and the chickens settled in, Henry stayed for supper. Katherine had been planning the meal all week, using some of her best supplies to make fried chicken, potatoes, and a dried apple pie. They ate at the new table Javier had built, and the domesticity of it felt natural and right. After supper, they sat outside and watched the sunset. Henry told her more about his past, about growing up on his family's Missouri farm, about the devastation of watching drought destroy years of work. She shared memories of her father, of growing up in San Francisco with a mother who had died when Katherine was young, of learning to cook and keep house and manage on her own. "I think my father would have liked you," Katherine said as the stars began to appear. "He respected people who worked hard and treated others fairly. I hope I would have earned his respect. I certainly respect what he passed on to you, both the land and the strength to work it." When Henry prepared to leave, he took her hand again, and this time he drew her closer. Catherine's breath caught as he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Henry bent his head and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and questioning. She responded instinctively, rising on her toes to meet him more fully. The kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate, and Catherine felt as though she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Lord, Catherine, you undo me," she laughed shakily. "I think the feeling is mutual." He kissed her once more, then forced himself to step back. "I need to go before I forget all propriety, but I will be back next week, and every week after if you will have me." "I will have you," she said softly, "for as long as you want to come. Then prepare yourself for a lifetime of visits," he said with a grin that made her heart tumble. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that Catherine came to treasure. Henry would visit every Sunday, sometimes bringing his men if there was heavy work to be done, but often coming alone for quieter afternoons spent in conversation and growing intimacy. They were careful to maintain propriety, aware of how gossip could spread in a small town, but it was increasingly difficult to keep their hands and lips from seeking each other out. Catherine's homestead began to flourish. The garden produced well, and she started preserving food for winter. The chickens laid eggs regularly. She purchased 2 goats from a farmer outside town, which provided milk. Slowly, carefully, she was building the life her father had envisioned. But more than the physical improvements to her land, Catherine felt herself changing. The loneliness that had been her constant companion since her father's death was fading, replaced by anticipation and joy. She found herself singing while she worked, planning meals to share with Henry, counting the days between his visits. In September, 3 months after that first day when Henry had ridden up with his men and their tools, he came to visit on a Saturday instead of Sunday. Catherine was surprised but delighted, greeting him with a smile that faded when she saw the serious expression on his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked immediately. "No, nothing is wrong, but I need to talk to you about something important." They sat at the table inside the cabin, and Henry took both her hands in his. "Catherine, these last 3 months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, watching you build your dream, being part of your life, it has shown me what I want for my future, and what I want is you." Catherine's heart began to race. "Henry, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it is fast. I know you have been focused on your land and making it work. But I love you, Catherine. I love your strength and your determination and your kindness. I love the way you laugh and the way you refuse to give up. I love everything about you, and I want to spend my life with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my grandmother's. It is not fancy, but it is all I have to offer right now besides my heart and my hands and my promise to stand beside you in everything you want to accomplish. Katherine Calloway, will you marry me?" Catherine looked at the ring, then at Henry's face, and felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, yes, Henry, I will marry you." The kiss they shared was different from all the others, sealing a promise, marking a commitment. When they finally broke apart, Henry slipped the ring onto her finger, and Catherine stared at it in wonder. "I have been saving money," Henry said. "I have enough to buy some land adjacent to yours, about 80 acres. Between your 40 and my 80, we could build something real, Catherine. A ranch, maybe run some cattle, grow crops. Together." "Together," Catherine repeated, loving the sound of the word. "I like that." They talked late into the evening, making plans, dreaming out loud. Henry wanted to be married soon, before winter set in. Catherine agreed, seeing no reason to wait when they both knew what they wanted. They would marry in Randsburg, Invite the few friends and neighbors they had made. It would be simple but meaningful. "I should speak to Reverend Matthews tomorrow," Henry said. "And I need to finalize the land purchase. But Katherine, I want you to know your land stays yours. I am not trying to take what your father left you." Katherine cupped his face in her hands. "What is mine is yours, Henry. We are building a life together. That means sharing everything, the burdens and the joys." The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a crisp October morning. Katherine wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Henry wore his best suit. Thomas, Miguel, and Javier stood as witnesses along with Abigail Morrison and her husband Frank. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Henry kissed Katherine with a passion that made the small gathering laugh and applaud. They celebrated with a meal at the Morrison place, Abigail having insisted on hosting. The food was plentiful, the company warm, and Katherine felt embraced by this community in a way she had never expected when she first arrived in Randsburg. These people had become her friends, her family. That night, Henry carried Katherine over the threshold of her cabin, which was now their cabin. She laughed at the traditional gesture, then caught her breath as he set her down and began kissing her with unmistakable intent. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and marveling. Katherine had never imagined that physical intimacy could be so overwhelming, so connecting. Lying in Henry's arms afterward, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The months that followed were hard work, but filled with joy. Henry moved into the cabin, and they began the process of combining their efforts. He finalized the purchase of the adjacent 80 acres, and they started planning for spring planting. Thomas, Miguel, and Javier came to help build a proper barn, and Henry purchased their first cattle, 6 heifers and a bull to start a breeding program. Winter in the Mojave Desert was mild but brought its own challenges. Water was less of a concern now with the well, but they had to ensure the animals were sheltered and fed. Katherine and Henry worked side by side every day, their partnership growing stronger with each shared task. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking about their plans for the future, reading aloud from the few books they owned, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence of two people who were content in each other's company. Katherine learned the particular ways Henry liked his coffee, the way he unconsciously rubbed his left shoulder when it ached from old injury, the sound of his laugh when something genuinely delighted him. Henry learned that Katherine hummed while she cooked, that she had a gift for seeing solutions to practical problems, that she cried during thunderstorms because they reminded her of the night her father died. By spring, the ranch was taking shape. They planted a larger crop of vegetables and added some grain for the animals. The cattle were thriving, and 2 of the heifers were pregnant. Katherine's chickens had multiplied, and she was now selling eggs in town. Henry had repaired and expanded the barn, and they had started building an addition onto the cabin, giving them more space. It was in late April, a year after Henry had first ridden up to find her digging with a broken shovel, that Katherine realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable once she paid attention. The morning sickness, the exhaustion, the tenderness in her breasts. She was both thrilled and terrified, unsure how to tell Henry. She chose a quiet evening after supper when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Henry, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Henry simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile Katherine had ever seen. He stood and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around in a circle before remembering to be gentle. He set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. A baby. Katherine, we are going to have a baby. His voice was full of wonder. Are you happy? She asked, needing to hear the words. Happy does not begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a future, love, and now a child. I cannot believe how blessed I am. They held each other as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, talking about the future in concrete terms now. They would need to finish the cabin addition before the baby came. Katherine would need to see the doctor in town regularly. They would need to prepare baby clothes, a cradle, all the supplies a child required. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Katherine continued to work, though Henry became increasingly protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or overexert herself. She found his concern endearing, even when it became slightly overbearing. Their friends rallied around them. Abigail Morrison threw a small gathering for Katherine, where the local women brought baby clothes they had sewn, blankets, and advice. Thomas built a beautiful cradle from carved wood, a gift that brought tears to Katherine's eyes. Miguel and Javier helped Henry finish the cabin addition in record time, creating a separate bedroom and a small nursery. In November, as the desert cooled toward winter, Katherine went into labor. Henry rode hard to fetch the doctor from town and brought back both the physician and Abigail Morrison. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine wondered if she had the strength to continue. But Henry was beside her the entire time, holding her hand, offering words of encouragement, his steady presence anchoring her. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a strong cry and a shock of dark hair, Katherine looked at Henry's face and saw tears streaming down his cheeks. The doctor placed the baby in her arms, and Katherine stared down at the tiny, perfect face, overwhelmed with love. "He is beautiful," Henry whispered, touching one finger to the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around it. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Katherine knew exactly what felt right. "William, after my father. His middle name can be Henry after you." "William Henry Lockwood," Henry said, trying it out. "It is a strong name. He will live up to it, I am sure." The weeks after William's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming responsibility. Katherine had never been so tired or so happy. Henry was a devoted father, taking his turns walking the baby when he cried, changing soiled cloths without complaint, marveling over every yawn and stretch. As winter settled over their ranch, Katherine would often stand at the window of their expanded cabin, William in her arms, and watch Henry working outside. She would remember that day when he had ridden up with his 3 men and new tools, finding her desperate and struggling with a broken shovel. She had thought then that she was alone, that she would always be alone. She could never have imagined how wrong she was. The ranch continued to grow over the next years. By the time William was 2, they had expanded their cattle herd significantly and added sheep. They had hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work, young men who lived in a bunkhouse Henry had built. The homestead her father had dreamed of had become a thriving ranch, but more than that, it had become a home filled with love. Katherine discovered she was pregnant again in the spring of William's 2nd year. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Henry was still protective, but had learned to balance his concern with respect for Katherine's capabilities. Their daughter was born in December, a beautiful girl with Katherine's green eyes and Henry's smile. They named her Sarah Grace, and William was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to touch her gently and bring her things. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. William grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed Henry everywhere, wanting to help with every task. Sarah became a bright, spirited girl who loved the animals and had a gift for healing injured creatures. When William was 6 and Sarah was 4, Katherine gave birth to twin boys, James and Thomas, named after her father's middle name and their friend who had first helped them find water. The cabin had grown along with the family, expanded again and again until it was a proper ranch house. They had guest rooms now for when friends visited, a large kitchen where Katherine taught Sarah to cook, a parlor with books and comfortable chairs. The land produced well, the cattle and sheep were profitable, and they had become one of the more successful ranches in the area. But for all the material success, what Katherine treasured most were the quiet moments. Sunday mornings when the whole family would pile into their wagon and drive to church in Randsburg. Evenings when Henry would read to the children while Katherine sewed. Nights when they would lie together in their bed, talking about the day, making plans, simply being together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry took Katherine out to the well where it had all begun. He had built a proper stone structure around it now, with a roof and a windlass for easy water drawing. They stood together looking at it, and Henry wrapped his arms around Katherine from behind. "You remember the day I first saw you?" he asked. "Digging with that broken shovel, covered in dust, looking like you were ready to fight anyone who suggested you give up," Katherine laughed. "I remember thinking you were either going to help me or tell me I was foolish. I am glad it was the former. I took one look at you and knew you were someone special. I did not realize then that I was looking at my future, at the woman who would become my partner in everything." Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "I thought I needed to do everything alone. I thought accepting help was weakness. You showed me that real strength is knowing when to let someone in, when to build something together. We have built something good, have we not?" Henry gestured to the ranch spread out around them, the house, the barns, the pastures with grazing animals. "We have built something wonderful," Katherine agreed. "But the best thing we built is our family. These years with you, watching our children grow, working side by side, it has been better than anything I could have imagined." Henry kissed her, slow and deep, and Katherine felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first time. 10 years of marriage, 4 children, countless challenges overcome, and he could still make her heart race with a kiss. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, they could see their children playing in the yard. William was teaching Sarah how to rope a fence post, while the twins tumbled with the dogs. The scene was so perfect, so exactly what Katherine had dreamed of during those lonely months after her father's death, that she had to blink back tears. "Happy?" Henry asked, seeing her expression. "Beyond happy, grateful, blessed, in love." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for riding up that day. Thank you for seeing me as someone worth knowing, worth loving. Thank you for saying yes when I asked to court you. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than money. You gave me everything I needed," Katherine said. "Tools to finish the well, help to build the ranch, but most importantly, you gave me partnership and love. You showed me I did not have to choose between my independence and having someone to share my life with." They reached the house, and William came running up. "Pa, can we go check the north pasture? I think I saw one of the cows ready to calve." Henry looked at Katherine, who nodded. "Go ahead. I will start supper, but make sure the twins do not wander off." As Henry and William headed to the barn to saddle horses, Katherine gathered Sarah and the twins and headed into the house. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, filled with the scent of bread she had baked that morning. She set Sarah to setting the table and the twins to simple tasks, and as she prepared the evening meal, she reflected on how far she had come. That day with the broken shovel felt like a lifetime ago. She had been so determined to prove herself, so convinced she had to manage alone. But the greatest gift Henry had given her was not just his help with the well or his assistance in building the ranch. It was showing her that accepting help was not weakness, that partnership did not diminish her strength, that love could make everything sweeter and more meaningful. She thought about her father's journal, which she still kept in a drawer in their bedroom. He had written about his dreams for this land, but he could never have imagined what it would become. She hoped he was proud of her, wherever he was. She hoped he knew she had not just preserved his legacy, but had expanded it, built upon it, created something that would last for generations. When Henry and William returned, reporting that the cow had indeed calved successfully and they had a healthy heifer, the family gathered around the table for supper. Katherine looked at each face. Henry, who had become even more handsome with age, the sun lines around his eyes deepening when he smiled. William, growing so tall and serious, already showing signs of the man he would become. Sarah, bright and quick, already reading at a level beyond her years. And the twins, still young enough to be more interested in playing with their food than eating it, but full of life and mischief. This was her family. This was the life she had built from nothing but determination, faith, and the willingness to accept help when it was offered. She had started with a broken shovel and a dream, and now she had everything she had ever wanted and so much more. After supper, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Katherine and Henry sat on the porch as they did most evenings. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air cool and clear. Henry took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "I have been thinking," Henry said. "William is getting to the age where he could take on more responsibility, and with the ranch doing so well, maybe we should think about getting him some formal education. There is that new school in Lancaster, a boarding situation for part of the year." Katherine considered this. The thought of William being away was painful, but she also wanted the best for her children, wanted them to have opportunities she and Henry had never had. "We should ask him what he wants. But yes, education is important for all of them." "Sarah too," Henry agreed. "She is bright as a button, and she should have every chance to learn and grow." They talked about the future, about plans for the ranch, about their hopes for their children. These conversations had become the backbone of their marriage, this constant communication and planning and dreaming together. "You ever miss San Francisco?" Henry asked suddenly. Katherine shook her head. "No. Sometimes I remember it, but I do not miss it. This is home. You are home. I found everything I needed right here. Even with the hardship, the isolation, the work, especially with all that, it made everything we built more meaningful because we earned it together." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Besides, I like who I am here. I like being a rancher's wife, a mother, a woman who knows how to work hard and build something lasting." Henry kissed the top of her head. "I like who you are too. In fact, I love who you are. I love everything about you just as much today as the day I married you. More, actually, because now I know you in all your strengths and quirks and perfect imperfections." Katherine smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "That is good, because you are stuck with me for the rest of your life." "Best fate I could imagine," Henry said softly. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Ranching was never easy, and there were hard seasons. A drought that tested their water supply, though the well Henry had helped dig never failed. A winter with unusual cold that required constant vigilance to protect the animals. Market fluctuations that affected their income. But they faced each challenge together, their partnership strong enough to weather any storm. William did go to the school in Lancaster for a few years, coming home for summers and holidays. The separations were hard, but he thrived in his studies and returned each time more educated and confident. Sarah followed a few years later, proving just as capable academically. The twins were still young, but already showing their own distinct personalities and talents. When Katherine was 38 and Henry was 43, they became grandparents for the first time. William, now 21 and helping run the ranch, had married a sweet young woman named Elizabeth from Lancaster. Their son was born in the spring, and holding her grandson for the first time, Katherine felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. By the time Katherine was 50, the ranch had become one of the most successful in the region. They employed a dozen hands, had vast herds of cattle and sheep, and had diversified into horses as well. Their children had grown into capable, good-hearted adults. William ran much of the day-to-day operations. Sarah had married a doctor and lived in town but visited often with her own growing family. The twins, now in their 20s, were partners in expanding the ranch's operations into new territories. But despite all the growth and change, some things remained constant. Katherine and Henry still worked side by side when the situation called for it. They still sat on the porch most evenings, talking and planning and simply being together. They still kissed goodnight every evening and good morning each day. They still made each other laugh and occasionally drove each other crazy and loved each other with a depth that had only grown over the decades. On a warm evening in late spring, as Katherine and Henry celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren at a gathering in their now expansive ranch house, Katherine found a quiet moment to slip away. She walked out to the old well, the one that had started everything, which they still maintained even though they had dug other wells across the property. Henry found her there, as she knew he would. He always knew where to find her, even in crowds, remembering. He asked, coming to stand beside her always, especially today. She looked at him, this man who had aged so well, whose blue eyes were still as clear and kind as they had been 30 years ago. Do you ever regret it? Tying yourself to a stubborn woman with a broken shovel and more determination than sense? Henry laughed, the sound rich and warm. Not for one single second. Best decision I ever made was riding up here that day. Best question I ever asked was if you needed help. And the best answer I ever received was when you said yes to being my wife. I would say yes again, Katherine said softly. Every time, every day I would choose you. I would choose you too. I will always choose you. They kissed, and Katherine marveled that after 30 years, his touch could still make her feel like the young woman who had stood in this very spot, and felt her heart recognize its match. The sounds of their family celebrating drifted from the house. The laughter of grandchildren, the voices of their grown children, the life they had created together. As the sun set over their land, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to Randsburg alone, desperate, armed with nothing but a land deed and determination. She had been digging a well with a broken shovel when a cowboy showed up with 3 men and new tools. That simple act of neighborly help had changed everything. Henry had given her the tools she needed to finish the well, but he had given her so much more. He had given her partnership, respect, love, and a family. He had shown her that strength was not just about doing everything alone, but about knowing when to accept help, when to lean on someone, when to build something together that was greater than what either could achieve alone. The well they had dug together had provided water for 30 years and counting, sustaining the ranch through drought and plenty. But the life they had built together, the love they had nurtured, the family they had raised, that was the true treasure. That was what would last long after they were gone, in the legacy of children and grandchildren who knew how to work hard, how to help neighbors, how to build something meaningful through partnership and love. As Katherine and Henry walked back to the house hand in hand, surrounded by the land they had cultivated and the family they had raised, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. She had started with a broken shovel and a dream. She had ended up with everything she could ever want, and so much more than she had ever imagined possible. The story of how Henry Lockwood rode up to Katherine Calloway's struggling homestead that hot July day in 1883 became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. But to Katherine and Henry, it was simply the beginning of their greatest adventure. The building of a life together, one day at a time, one shared task at a time, one expression of love at a time. And when they were old and gray, sitting on that same porch they had sat on for decades, surrounded by generations of family they had created, they would still hold hands and look at each other with the same love and wonder they had felt when their journey together began. Because some things, some connections, some loves were simply meant to be, started by something as simple as a cowboy showing up with 3 men and new tools, and grown into something as profound and lasting as the earth and sky themselves. The well still provided water. The land still produced. The family still grew and thrived. And at the center of it all was the love between a stubborn woman and a steady cowboy who had found in each other exactly what they needed to build not just a ranch, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. That was how their story ended, or rather, how it continued, because true love stories do not really end. They evolve and grow and expand, encompassing new generations, new challenges, new joys. Katherine and Henry's story became part of the land itself, whispered in the desert wind, reflected in the water that still flowed from the well they dug together, carried forward in the hearts of everyone who knew them and loved them and learned from their example. And if anyone ever asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, Katherine and Henry would smile at each other and say the same thing. Start with good tools, dig deep for what you need, do not be afraid to accept help, and once you find something worth keeping, hold on to it with everything you have. Then they would hold hands, and the love in their eyes would tell the rest of the story better than any words ever could.